Working? Hello, hello. There we go. Great. Welcome back, everybody. We invite you to come and take your seats. We can take advantage of a little bit of our extra time here. All right, George, we ready? Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. It's been a great start. I'm Travis Larkin. We're going to talk about global markets, including U.S. markets. We're going to go like this today. Our good friend Ragnar with the numbers is going to give us a look at what's happening in the markets around the world. Following his presentation, we've asked Bob DeHaan, who is General Counsel for the National Fisheries Institute, which is our trade association in the United States, to give us some insight on the situation with the tariffs. The reason I've asked him to do this is that I know this is of number one interest to all of us right now. A lot of unknowns, but Bob works closely in this area and will be able to give us some insight. And then following his remarks, we'll have a conversation among ourselves here about what's happening. So Ragnar, hit it.
So, good morning, everyone. And thanks to George and the rest of the TCRS team for the opportunity to present once more and at the Shrimp Summit. The venue is beautiful. The audience look fresh, sharp, and awake. So, and to me, I think the program and perhaps especially this session is as interesting as ever before. Let me skip through the panel here. Just a short intro on myself and Contali, the company that I represent. Contali is a private and independent analysis and research company dedicated to salmon and finfish for more than 30 years, but taking up the coverage of shrimp close to 5 years ago. I have the role as chief analyst with Contali, and my colleague Erwin Termat will catch up with you during the production session after the lunch break. I will start here at a very high level, and I'll use statistics from FAO as a basis for this. Aquaculture is important and part of the future for many reasons: nutritional value, food security, resource utilization, and for, say, community and social growth in many communities. And growth rates, they have been, they are, and they will be declining if you look at the pure growth rates. But what we see here is that growth rate for crustaceans and shrimp in particular, they hold up far better than for finfish. So if aquaculture truly is part of the solution for feeding the world, shrimp is pivotal for achieving this. If we look within this category, Paneus venami is the true driver behind this and growth winner in aquaculture shrimp. For the last 10 years, the cumulative average growth rate is just shy of the 7.2 percentage milestone that measures really when we double in a decade. And on the right side here, we see how the big three, Ecuador, India, and China, have seen growth rates surpassing all of the others, but really has contributed to this strong growth within shrimp. However, this session is about the markets, and the next few graphs will be based on some, let's say, methodological approach that Contali has chosen in order to trying to systemizing the shrimp world, as we have done for some of the finfish species that we've covered for a long time. Our market supply models attempts to reconcile the supply of shrimp with what and where shrimp is consumed around the world. And I'll come back to that in a short while. But if considering our model for Vaname and looking back at 2024, it was not the largest markets or the consumption markets that drove growth, but other markets, leading to stronger market diversification, which, as we all know, what happened on Liberation Day on April 2nd, might come in handy. We are, let's say, showing the parallel output from our model on monodal. But we will limit the focus on this segment through this presentation and talk specifically on the white leg. If we look at this slide, I guess it clearly shows that there is a huge difference in how, let's say, a constrained or notably costlier access to the US market affects the two different species differently. With Vaname representing the only 20% of the global consumption by the US market, whereas monodon is even smaller, only 2% is our estimate. So that's more all Asia. So I'll get back a bit to what is a few takeaways on our models and our methodology. First of all, we have introduced something we called LSE, the live shrimp equivalent. In reconciliation of the supply versus the market or the apparent consumption, we use conversion factors in the trade of the various products and to convert that back to the weight of a live shrimp. That's when I present numbers on the market supply, it is all measured in this term, live shrimp equivalent. We developed the same for finfish with whole fish equivalent already decades ago. And when we talk about supply to market, that is not imports, but it covers the same, say, trade flows. We focus on export statistics rather than import statistics because that covers say, the whole world better. We think that export statistics normally are better adapted to the producing country and that errors and mistakes are much more rapidly caught up by the industry and thus a better, say, statistical source to use for grasping the whole global trade flow. More so, it includes the time lag in logistics. So when we have an export statistic released for one specific month, there is normally everything from 0 to over 2 months of time lag in logistics, in transport, and where more than 95% of the trade of shrimp is frozen. Then we also have a kind of a short-term forecast when knowing what's released on the export side, what will actually show up in the market sometime later. And we differentiate the, let's say, trade flows by the number of days or number of months that we calculate as the time to market. And we also build this model set on production estimates that we have for the various producing regions, so that we also take into account the domestic supply from domestic production to these local markets, which is not straightforward, but at least that's how the methodology works. So therefore, kind of the slides and estimates I'll provide in the two next sections will focus a lot on this supply to market definition. What's available for consumption in the various market blocks. So let's look at the US market at first. It's surely an important market. It's a market where farm shrimp meet wild shrimp, Vaname and monodon are there. Argentine red, Giordani, Pandalus borealis on the wild side. But still, for Vaname, the US market represents only 20% of the global apparent consumption. Another characteristic of the US market is that shrimp is a truly top species in both US retail and in US food service. While between 25% and 30%, supported here by statistics or reports that come from, say, historically about IRI, Circana, this is showing value. The share is surely or likely higher if you look at the volume. And actually the drop that we've seen in how much shrimp represents in 2024 is mainly due to salmon and salmon pricing, not volume, being really peaking over the past few years that we have seen. So salmon actually took up the #1 place in retail in the US for this year. I'm sure our panelists later will also comment on the importance of shrimp, both in retail and also in the food service segment of the US. In addition to this point, why we're talking tariffs here, and why are these tariffs that were announced in early April, how come they stir up so much turmoil for shrimp? Well, if you just look at original rates that were announced on Liberation Day, if that would be or will be the final, and we use the import value composition for shrimp in the US market, the average tariff rate would have been slightly over 25%, with more than 70% of the import value affected actually being at a rate of 25% or higher. For what it's worth, both the pause before the implementation of tariffs and the later temporary lowering of tariffs to 10%, it has certainly spurred the second quarter supply to market, which will, through our models, we estimate that it will likely end at 15% growth measured in tons live shrimp equivalent, whereas it hits 10% for the first or full first half. We see that the growth that has come more or less equally from the major suppliers to the US market. And import prices, here exemplified with frozen shell-on shrimp from Ecuador, they are back, have been back for the first 4 months, more or less to the 2022 level, notably higher than the 2024 and 2023 levels. And finally, as kind of our last slide on the US market, I've included showing a set of, say, indexed retail pricing, both for raw and cooked shrimp presentations, comparing it to salmon and to premium cuts of various meats. And this does not show kind of the nominal pricing, but if we start back 15 years ago, 2012, and see how the indexed development for each of the proteins have developed, we do see that shrimp has been not showing a lot of growth, and thus being definitely a competitive position price-wise among the proteins in the US market. So I'll shift from this part and continue a bit on, let's say, to the other side of the planet. At least this picture here, it shows the different perspective of the world. It's a non-US, we don't see the Americas here. And what we see is really what's left. It covers pretty much most other consumption areas for Vanamay. And looking again at what does this compromise? 80% of global apparent consumption of Vanamay, using the same model output, indicates that a market supply to all of these markets, they have grown by 9% in the first half of 2025. And only slightly more during the second quarter than in the first quarter. And you also see in the slide to the left here, how much kind of Asia represents here versus Europe and all of the other markets that are non-US markets. There are, however, large differences in the growth rate between these markets blocks, and where I will try to highlight a few details for some, but where you will hear a lot of more insights and takeaways from the panel that follows after the first one. I will start here with Europe, where the EU is estimated to have had a market supply growth of nearly 25% during the first half, whereas the rest of Europe, other Europe, closes in at 8%. And for the EU, it's particularly during the second quarter that we have seen this growth with 35% increase estimated. Having what we have as kind of a unique access to weekly data on EU imports. This graph shows, if we start on the lower side graph, this shows the accumulated import volumes to the EU by week from Ecuador and India. And this kind of shows how rapidly the accumulated graph is growing during the second quarter here, closing in at 40% growth through week 23, and India at slightly less, around 42%. These are, however, data or imports that are for frozen shrimp and may include here other species than Vanamei, but are predominantly including that species. And correspondingly, these illustrations are also showing the price development on imports, where we do see prices dropping from the first quarter and to and through the second quarter, more so for Ecuadorian frozen shrimp. I see here that while the years are not shown on the upper graphs, but black is the 2023 and orange 2024 in these graphs. So we see a similar picture for India, but the drop is to a lesser extent. Moving over to China, the great unknown. We apply the same model methodology here, but are of course much more uncertain on what we enter or put in as the domestic production and the domestic supply. We also estimate a growth in the supply to market for China for the first half, but where we see that there is only a marginal growth in, let's say, foreign supply, around 1%, but where we have estimated a slightly more coming behind this growth, coming from domestic production. We see also that the price level measured here as a first sale level in China has seen a slightly different development than for many other regions, where there has been pressure and prices are relatively low for the first part of 2025. Continuing to Southeast Asia or other Asia, an important, let's say, bundle that combines to a market block that also represent challenges in estimating the actual market sizes. But this includes a series of countries which have the role of both being producing nations, or exporting nations, and notably consumers of domestic supplies. And even some of them represent a role as importing markets. Only China and the US rank really higher than this market block we have selected and called other Asia. But I think more importantly, some of these have, say, within these markets, they have well-developed supply chains for live